What's up, guys? Nick True here, and today we're going to talk about the 9 biggest ideas and the 3 takeaways that I'm actually going to implement from The One Thing by Gary Keller and Papasan. Now, unlike some of the other book reviews I've seen, I'm not going to focus on how the best of the best have used this concept to find success in sports or business or music or life. Instead, we're going to focus on how everyday people like you and I can use the concepts in this book to find success in the everyday practical things that we're focused on. Now, like I said, this book was written by Gary Keller and Papasan, and if you don't know, that's Gary Keller of Keller Williams Real Estate. In 2017, the 155,000 Keller Williams real estate agents closed more than 1 million deals and did a little over $300 billion in sales revenue. Obviously, Gary Keller knows a thing or two about finding success in something, so let's see what he has to say. Now, one thing you need to understand is that this book has one main question, and everything in the book circles around it and keeps coming back to it over and over again. Essentially, every chapter follows the same structure. It sets up a point to be made, makes the point and provides supporting evidence for it, and then connects that point to the focusing question that it introduces at the very beginning of the book. So it's important to understand this focusing question, which is, what is the one thing you can do such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or even unnecessary? This is the first big idea of the book, and it is the main big idea of the book. As you may have guessed by the title, The One Thing, the whole book focuses on the one thing by focusing on this one question. Now, big idea number 2 is something that the authors introduce in chapter 2 called the domino effect. It's based on a paper written by Lauren Whitehead in 1983 where they discovered that dominoes could not only topple over other dominoes, but they could topple over bigger things, namely dominoes that were 50% bigger than them. A couple decades later, a physicist reproduced Whitehead's experiment using wood. He created a bunch of wooden dominoes, all 50% bigger than the ones before it. The first one was 2 inches tall. The last one was 3 feet tall. Here's where it gets really interesting though. If you kept this experiment going, if you kept making larger and larger dominoes, the 10th domino would be as tall as Peyton Manning. The 18th domino would be as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The 23rd domino as big as the Eiffel Tower. The 31st as big as Mount Everest. And the 57th domino would be able to bridge the distance between the Earth and the moon. After going through this exercise, the book brings it back around and compares this to success in your own life. You're trying to create a domino effect. Just like the domino effect, success grows exponentially. You need to focus on the one thing and then knock it over. And then when you do that, it usually leads to knocking over the next one thing that's bigger. And then that one leads to the next and the next and the next and so on. Eventually, you'll be knocking over dominoes that look like massive things from the outside, and everybody will see you as being, wow, so successful, and it seems like it's all at once. When in reality, you've been knocking little dominoes over along the way that have helped lead you to that big domino. The phrase that the book uses here is success is sequential, not simultaneous. It may look like big success from the outside all at once to some people, but in reality, it's sequential things over and over and over again that lead to one thing after another. Your job is to find that one lead domino, the one in front there, and hit it over and over again until it falls over. Okay, let's talk about the third big idea, which is that the one thing is at the heart of extraordinary results. All big companies, major athletes, musicians, top performers of any kind, all of them have had their success due to the focus of the one thing. Kobe Bryant, for example, is well known for his work ethic and his focus. During the season, before every single game, he shows up a few hours early and goes through a set routine of shots, and he focuses on making 250 shots before the game. During the off-season, his daily practice routine has him making anywhere from 500 to 1,000 shots. Michael Phelps is another great example. During the height of his career, he would swim 7 days per week, not 6 like the rest of the swimmers he was competing with. By doing this, he figured he was getting a 52-day advantage over everybody else, which equated to roughly 7 weeks. You can find this type of intense focus amongst high achievers in all aspects of life, as you're probably not surprised to hear. But let's move on to the next section. This whole first section is really dedicated to just proving to you that the one thing is the key factor in success amongst all these people. It just props up the value of the one thing. The second section of the book is concerned with the lies that we typically believe about success and how to overcome them. And it opens up with a quote from Mark Twain, who says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." Then the book goes on to explain the 6 lies about success. And the problem is that these are truthy lies. They sound really good, but unfortunately they're still lies. So when we pursue them, we're not going to find the success that we're after. The first lie brings me to big idea number 4, which is all things are not equal. The lie here is that we often believe that everything on our to-do list has equal value. It all matters, but that's just not true. Hopefully you've heard of the Pareto principle before, or it's sometimes called 80-20, which basically says 20% of the input, 20% of the things that you do account for 80% of the output, 80% of the gains that happen. If you did group projects in college, you probably know this firsthand. 20% of the team probably accounted for 80% of the final grade. You can apply it to finance as well. If you're looking at being focused on debt repayment or investing or learning how to budget or clipping coupons or really optimizing your insurance, if you analyzed all those things and looked at it for your situation, you'd probably find that when you focus on 20% of those things, that's going to account for 80% of the success that you have with money. This is where the book, The One Thing, takes this to the extreme. They say, yeah, that's all well and good, 20-80, got it. What would be even better though is if you looked at the 20% of the 20% of the 20%. Basically, they want you to look at that 20% and keep going over and over again until you get to one simple thing, one thing that is going to account for the largest impact. The phrase the book uses is turning your to-do list of all the things you have to do into a success list, which is the one thing you need to do. And then once that's done, you go and choose one more thing you need to do. And you always are looking at the thing that's going to have the biggest impact and lead to the most success. So we throw away the to-do list and we implement the success list. Which brings me to the next lie, or big idea number 5, which is that multitasking is impossible. You can't do it. Here, the book goes through quite a number of research studies that look at multitaskers to see how productive they actually are, and the results are absurd. For one, there's just lots of things that you literally can't do at the same time. So what we think is multitasking in our heads is actually task switching. And so we've got a bunch of tabs pulled up on our computer or windows open, and we're flying around and switching things up and working on this and then working on that. We think we're being ultra productive, but it's quite the opposite. Now, obviously, the price for task switching varied depending on the complexity of the task, but the studies they showed found that anywhere from 25% for really simple stuff to over 100% increase in time for really complicated tasks. They also found that people who work at computers every day, check their email, switch tabs, switch windows, change programs, an average 37 times per hour. For those of you doing the math, that's every other minute. And keep in mind, we just said that at a minimum, we're adding 25% increase in time for things that we're doing whenever we're switching tasks. Maybe now you can see just how unproductive multitasking or task switching really is. Of course, the book knows that you and I are going to push back on this. We know for a fact that there are some things we can do at the same time. We can fold laundry and watch Netflix, we can drive and talk on the phone, we can eat and walk. But the book explains that in our brains, we have multiple channels and different ways that we process data. This is why we can walk and talk all at the same time. But the key is that our focus isn't on both activities. One of them is happening in the foreground, one of them is happening in the background. You're not multitasking with your focus on both things. That's why if you come to like a big crack in the road or a split, you would stop talking because you would want to focus as you cross that. In the same way that if you all of a sudden got a call from your sister and she had just been in a car wreck and you were trying to talk her through something, you would stop walking. They end the chapter by making this point. We fully expect pilots and brain surgeons to be 100% focused and not multitask while they're performing their work. And if somebody was caught multitasking while they were doing that, we would really have it out for them. However, we don't do that with our work or what's important in our life. And the question is, why in the world would we do that? If we recognize that multitasking doesn't work in the things that are super important, why would we multitask for the things that are super important to us? Though multitasking is sometimes kind of possible, it's never possible to do it effectively. The phrase that they use is that if you try to catch 2 rabbits, you'll catch neither. All right, that brings me to big idea number 6, which is have selected discipline for a short period of time. Essentially, we're going to combine the next 2 lies because they go hand in hand. And they are that super successful people are also super disciplined people, and that willpower is always on will call. Both of these are lies and not the way things actually work. Now, this was by far my favorite section of the book and the one that encouraged me the most. They showed a number of studies that basically proved that success is not some long drawn out race. Instead, it's a series of short sprints that are focused at a single area and then another short sprint after that. You don't have to be this crazy disciplined person and muster tons of willpower day after day, week after week, month after month in order to be successful. Instead, you're going to have selected discipline for a short period of time to implement a habit and then let that habit take over from there. When it comes to budgeting, for example, we think that the people who are really good with money or budget really well just must be the most disciplined people in the world, and they just have to maintain that way for life. That's not the case at all, though. You don't need a ton of discipline to get on a budget. What you need is the habit of budgeting. And so you only need enough discipline until that habit is built. According to the book, it takes an average of 66 days to form a new habit. This is where that second lie kicks in. The book compares your willpower to that of a cell phone battery. You wake up in the morning, you're fully charged, you're ready to go, you have tons of willpower for the day. But as the day goes on, if you have more and more decisions to make, if you have a tough day at work, people are not fun there, or maybe the kids are really giving you a hard time, or something happens and your willpower starts to get drained. And then by the end of the day, if you're trying to use any kind of willpower to make a tough decision, you're probably not going to. Instead, you're going to slip back into your base habits, your default settings. This is why when you're dieting, if you don't yet have that habit built of eating healthy, if you have a really hard day or really hard week, on the weekend, you're really likely to break that diet because you just don't have enough willpower left. So you're gonna eat ice cream and watch a bunch of Netflix. And that's because your base habit, those default settings that don't require willpower, are not in tune with eating healthy. They're in tune with some other lifestyle. So what you need to do is have selected discipline for a short period of time until the habit changes. And then that changes your default settings. So then in order to do things like stick to a budget and be good with your money will now become a habit that becomes your default setting. That's your base. So again, this now connects back to that focusing question. What is the one habit that you can focus on right now on building that if you can get in place is going to make all the other habits or things you want to do easier or even unnecessary?
For me, I'm focused on the habit of getting up at 5:30 right now because I've noticed that if I can do that, a lot of other things are falling into place.
When I get up early, I'll work out, do my journal, read my Bible, eat breakfast, and make sure my budget is on point. If I don't get up early, other things become harder and harder to do. And so right now, my one habit that I'm focused on is getting up at 5:30 in the morning, because when I do that, all the other things on my success list become easier and some of them even unnecessary. All right, that brings us to big idea number 7, which is that a balanced life doesn't exist. I know that there's a ton of talk in today's world around work-life balance, but this book just throws that out the window completely and says, look, there's no such thing as work-life balance. If you think of all the important things in your life on a balance beam and you're standing in the middle trying to just maintain an even balance between everything, you're not going to find success by doing that. The book talks about how magic does not happen in the middle. So if your life's a balance beam and you've got all these things going on, if you're staying in the middle, the magic is not going to happen there. Instead, what you should do is you should focus on a series of short sprints to different extremes. And so maybe you run this way for a little while, you focus heavy in this area, and then before it gets too out of balance, you run back to the other extreme and focus it, and then that way you can maintain the illusion of balance, but you're not actually balancing. Of course, you can't go too far out of balance, because if you do, sometimes you might reach a point of no return. So the key is figuring out how you can intentionally go out of balance just enough and then come back to the center. In the book, they call this the idea of counterbalancing. You're not maintaining balance, you're going one way and then you're counterbalancing to get back without going to the extreme too much. Rather than sticking with this kind of balance beam analogy, the book transitions to an analogy of juggling balls. And it says that if you imagine the 5 key areas of your life, you've got work, finance, family, friends, health, and then integrity. If you imagine these 5 different areas of your life that are important and you imagine them as juggling balls, there are times where you can throw one up really high and keep one lower or tighter and focus on it for a while, but eventually one of the balls that you threw up really high and kind of got away from for a second, it's going to come back down and you need to catch it in order to keep all the balls juggling. They continue with this analogy by talking about what the balls are actually made of though. The work and finance ball, for example, is actually a rubber ball, and it's the only one that if you're juggling and something happens and you need to focus on another area for a super intense period of time, you can can actually drop the work and finance ball and it will bounce back. However, the other 4 balls, the family, health, integrity, friendships, those balls are made of glass. And if you drop them, there's almost no way that they will come back without at least having a nick or a scratch or a dent, or maybe even have shattered. These areas of your life require a much tighter counterbalance. You can't go too far to the extreme for too long in these areas without coming back to the other side and counterbalancing them back to normal. The main point here is that all these areas of your life require counterbalancing, not actual balance if you want to be successful. Now at this point, we've learned why the one thing is important and all the lies around success that we believe and how to overcome them. But we haven't actually gotten into the real meat, the practicality of it all. Well, that's what we're gonna do right now. Big idea number 8 is how to use the focusing question to actually break down the task that you have to do. Let's look at an example and I'll show you what I mean. Now, Hannah and I would like to buy a house in the next 3 to 5 years. Let's say that in order to do that, we want to save $30,000 for the down payment and closing costs. So now we ask the focusing question. What's the one thing that we can do that will help us get this $30,000 in the next 3 to 5 years so that everything else becomes easier or even unnecessary? Well, this one's pretty obvious, right? We need to increase our savings rate. This one's kind of a no-brainer. We have to increase our monthly savings rate if we want to hit this goal. So now we ask the focusing question again. What's the one thing we can do to increase our monthly savings rate? Well, there's 2 things we could do. We can cut expenses or we can increase our income. Now in our case, we already have a pretty tight budget, and so increasing income is probably going to be a better bet rather than cutting expenses. So let's ask the question again. What is the one thing I could do to increase our monthly income? Well, here, there's quite a few things I could do. I could get more clients, ask for a raise with my clients. I could start a new side hustle. I could go through my stuff around the house and sell it. I could try and create some sort of product and sell that. So there's all these different things, this is where the brainstorming comes in, that you can do to help increase income. But I need to ask, what's the one thing I can do so that these other things become easy or even unnecessary? Right now, I think probably the best bet, the one thing, is gonna be this one, the asking for a raise. So let's move forward with this one. So what do we do now? Well, you guessed it. We're gonna ask this question again. What's the one thing I can do to help me better ask for a raise? Well, I could put some sort of summary together for the boss to help correlate my value that I bring to the table and the company's value and how it's gone up since I started working, and then ask for a raise based on what I provide. I could read a book on negotiation and maybe get better prepared for negotiating a salary raise. Maybe I could call 5 friends and ask for their recommendations on what they think, or even ask about their salary if they work in a similar field that I do. I could do an online search for other freelancers doing the same type of work I do and try and figure out what the average pay is for them, and if I'm underpaid, use that as a baseline to ask for a raise. There's probably more things I could add to this list, but for now we'll stick with these. So which one of these 4 is the one thing that is probably going to make the biggest impact? I think right now it's probably this summary for the boss. So what do we do now? Again, let's ask the question one more time. What's the one thing I can do to actually move forward with creating this summary of my work for the boss that I can then present and ask for a raise? Well, I could make an outline of what all needs to go into that summary. I could read through past emails and projects and try and figure out what it is that I've actually been doing. I could organize my projects into some order and figure out what has made the most impact. I could look at the company revenue and expenses and try and figure out where I can correlate my projects to increasing the company revenue or decreasing expenses, thus showing my value. When I look at these 4, probably the one that makes the most sense, the one that's gonna make all these other things easier, is if I make this outline first. If I can make the outline first, then all these other tasks become much easier to do because I'll know what I'm looking for. Great, so now I know exactly what I need to do. All of this work came down, and now I need to know I need to make an outline for a summary that I'm gonna show the boss so that I can try and get a new raise, so that I can try and increase my income, so that I can increase my savings rate, so that ultimately I can save $30,000 to buy the house in a few years that Hannah and I would like to have. In the book, there's another great quote by Mark Twain who says, "The secret to getting ahead is getting started, and the secret to getting started is breaking down all of the complex tasks into manageable tasks and then getting started with the first one." To stay on track for the best possible day, the best possible week, month, year, life, you have to continually ask the focusing question over and over and over again. Which brings us to big idea number 9, which is the key to finding that one thing is through purpose-driven priority. Another way of looking at the example we just did is through the lens of purpose. In order to find my one thing of creating an outline right now, I needed to start with getting a house. But we can even go one layer above that and ask, well, what's the purpose of the house? Well, why do Hannah and I want a house in the first place? And what kind of house do we want? How did I come up with that $30,000 number? Well, for us, we know that we want a house in the Southeast, which tends to be a cheaper area of the country to live in, so that's helpful to know. We also know that we want not a huge house, but a big enough house and a big enough yard and entertaining area to have lots of people over, whether it's family or friends. We're also even thinking one day we'd like to host small events or retreats on our property. Both of us grew up in the country with access to property, and so while we don't need, 30 acres or anything like that, we do want to have a few acres that we can raise our own kids on and give them the same experience that we had growing up. The book breaks this down by saying, what's your big overall purpose? What is a someday goal for you based on those big purposes? And then what is the one thing? What's the 5-year goal that would help you get to the someday goal? And then the 1-year goal to help you get to the 5-year, and then a monthly to help you get to the year, and then a week to get to the month, and then ultimately, what's the one thing you're going to do today that impacts all of those things that ultimately is informed by the purpose of your someday goal? Now, at the end of every single book I read, I make a really detailed summary. It takes me a couple of hours to typically do it, and then I write down the 3 things that I'm actually going to implement in my life from all the information I read, because ultimately, if I don't implement anything, it was just a waste of time. The first thing I'm implementing, and the most obvious, is just simply asking that focusing question every single day. I'm already journaling every morning, and so it's simple to work that into my routine. I'll ask, what's the one thing I can do today to make all the other things that I want to get done easier or even unnecessary? And then I won't go to bed until I get that one thing done. The second thing I'm implementing is killing my multitasking. It's absurd, it's ridiculous, and it's something that I've really struggled with for a long time. The last thing I'm implementing is really focusing on that selected discipline for a short period of time by building new habits that will change my default settings. Right now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that the one habit that I'm working on is waking up at 5:30 in the morning, because I found that when I do that, all the other things that I want to get done start to fall into place for me. All right, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this book review of The One Thing. If you would like to get all of my notes on the book, I'll leave a link in the description down below to that. Please subscribe to this channel for more videos just like this. And remember, I can teach you how to read books and apply the knowledge to your life to get ahead with your money, but I can't make you do it. The choice is yours. I'll see y'all next time.